Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about cybersecurity at the board level. Um, Welcome, and I'll give myself a quick intro and then get going here. I am able to see the Q&A, so I will do my best to catch questions there, but if I don't, I will address those at the end of the presentation. So my name is David Messer. I work for iON United. We're based in Calgary. We're serving Western Canada and the rest of the country and beyond as we go here. I also teach for SANS some of the time. My background is long and varied, so I won't bore you with that. I've led a variety of security teams in a bunch of different organizations. I've been a pen tester, blue teamer, and talked to a lot of organizations at various levels of management and otherwise about cybersecurity, which is what I want to talk to you about today. First, though, I want to tell you a quick story. Imagine, if you will, the Socialist Party of East Germany. I forget what it was called. Had just changed leaders, and they were promising mass reforms in order to boost their popularity, basically, with the population of East Germany. But those reforms were slow in coming, so there were mass protests on the street, and as a result, there were ongoing strict controls. Enter Günter Schabowski. He was the newly appointed Socialist Party spokesperson, and his job was to talk to the Western press, often multiple times a day. This was a new thing for him and for the party. He wasn't really used to this Western style of press conference and so on, but he was full of confidence, because all one needs to do in order to conduct a press conference is be able to speak German and read a text without mistakes, right? So he was full of confidence, but he was in an unfamiliar situation, presenting to a bunch of people that he didn't really know. His mission was to make the regime look good. And so he announces, based on some briefing notes he'd got earlier in the day, that all East Germans can get a passport. And the question was, when? And he responded, well, immediately, because he kind of skipped over the fine print. He didn't read the conditions or the plans for rolling out passports and so on. So he basically created an open season for East Germans to get passports. This did not achieve the desired results. Well, maybe it made the party a little bit more popular, but it wasn't what they intended. People lined up to visit the West. Guards weren't prepared and ultimately opened the gates, and this literally changed the world. This was the beginning of the end for the communist government and really the entire Soviet Union. His boss referred to this as the botch. So we don't want to have a botch like this or any other kind, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. The moral of this story is you need to be prepared. Talking at the board level, at least for me and for most, I would wager, IT and security practitioners, it's a different environment. It's a different kind of presentation. So you need to understand your audience, research your audience, understand their expectations, what makes them tick, and very importantly as well, make sure that what you think you're saying, or what the words that you are saying are the words that they are hearing and they are actually understanding your meaning. This means we need to keep it relatively simple, concise, and clear. So I hope you enjoyed that story. I started with that because story we should be practicing. If you imagine the average board meeting, there's probably dozens of presenters over the course of a couple of jam-packed days. At least that's what most often happens, especially when the board has to fly in, not these days. Stories are engaging, they're powerful. They can get people's attention and bring them into your world. It allows you to connect with your audience, and if possible, well, you want to end on a positive note and fold in some humor as well if you can. So I thought, what better way to illustrate that than to start off with a small story? And we want to not be Gunters when we go and present to the board. So let's talk first a little bit about security and risk at the board level. We need to think a little bit about what is security, what is risk, because there are two different things. There's two different perspectives. Security is what is, generally speaking. This is a broad generalization, but security is your current state. It's what is. Risk is what might be. And I think it's important to differentiate between those two things, because your audience is very familiar with dealing with risk, but not necessarily so familiar with dealing with security outside of, media, social media, and those kinds of forums. You may get lucky, but that's generally the case. So let's enter our boardroom here, and imagine your typical board members. I'll talk about this a bit more later, but they're generally older. They're generally less experienced in technology, generally leaders, financial background. Importantly, very few have technical or security backgrounds. And you have the opportunity, shall we say, to follow up the chief financial officer. Now, this is a person who's been here many times before. This is something the board is very familiar with. They understand finance. They understand risk as it relates to finance. They have, it's very clear cut. It's broken down. Things cost money or they don't cost money. They have strategic risk and operational, financial, compliance, and they know, the CFO can put values up here or information up here about what the appetite is, what they're doing to address that risk, and what the residual risk is. It's fairly cut and dried. And then, as the Chief Information Security Officer, you get to follow this up. And it's code red, it's urgent. We've blocked 4.9 billion attacks. We've got 31,000 vulnerabilities. There's 30% more advanced persistent threats, whatever that means. We know that we're supposed to bring statistics or numbers or data to the. My experience has been we don't really know how to present that data or what that data should actually be, because this information is not really that useful for the board. They don't know what this means. It makes them nervous. They get confused. What is risk? Because they're familiar with financial risk. Well, how do they relate these numbers, those 4.9 billion attacks blocked? How do they relate that to risk, right? What is an APT, but what does an increase in APTs mean to me? They're sitting there wondering, are they in trouble or not? Are they getting, value for their security dollar? Because that's really why you're there, right? Is to tie dollars to security and ultimately to the business performance. And so maybe they're going to feel that now they have to get in there and help, or you're going to get their attention in a bad way, because they now see beyond what you're bringing them. They're seeing some other issues that they need to address, right? Because they're not getting the right information. Even worse, they might be thinking things like putting the CFO in charge, because risk is risk. The CFO clearly understands risk. Why don't we put them in charge? Or you lose the attention in the mind share, right? I forget to feed the dog. When's the game starting? People are falling asleep, and so on. The result of all of this is chaos. Nobody knows what you're asking for. Nobody can give that to you. That pushes all the way down through the organization, and nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing, and you can't deliver on reducing corporate risk, essentially, which is your objective. And even worse is you lose trust, or you break that, either don't establish it in the first place, or you break that trust in the board. They will focus on the wrong things or lack focus altogether. They'll ask the wrong questions, or worse, questions completely out of left field, that then when you answer, you're not prepared. It's not a coherent story. You might not actually, you might make your own situation worse, and that will make the board nervous. They don't know what perhaps questions to ask, so they'll start to back away slowly, or even worse, they'll get down in the weeds and they'll start to help. And all of that erodes your trust. And you need that level of trust, because this won't be, board presentations generally are not one-shot affairs. So you're going to want to come back and continue this story later. And if you've failed to establish that trust or broken that trust, you might not get invited back, which means you can't get what you want. Reestablishing that trust, and you won't have the mind share, the attention on the things you really want to deal with. So let's start with the first step. What do we do about this? First, understand your objective. Why are you there? And this, I stole this from Gartner, but it's a useful acronym to remember. First, start with brief. When you are briefing the board, you're not going to have a lot of time most often. You might have 15 minutes. When I presented to my board, I was given 3 slides, and I had to send those slides to the board in advance. They would review those slides. They had to be relatively self-explanatory, and they might invite me to come and talk to those slides, or they might decide, yeah, we don't care about that, or we got enough information, and they didn't invite me, or at least not that time round. But expect not to have a lot of time. Not, you can't cover a lot of content in that time. So be brief with a very clear ask, probably one thing, one goal. What are you going in there to accomplish? The board, by definition, is transparent. So should you be. You don't want to try to hide the warts, or conceal incidents, for example, or not mention things that are clearly going to be important to them. They have to be transparent. You have to be transparent to them. You have to be accurate. Don't guess. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know the answer. I'll get back to you. Let me figure that out. You need to know your subject material. It needs to be relevant to them. So at an organizational level, what's their cost? What's their risk? What do you want them to do about it? It has to be relevant to them. And this means you need to high grade your content. And again, I come from a technical background. That's where I started out. And so I know that when I high grade something, that's not high graded. I need to go and high grade it 1 or 2 more times to really get it to the right level. And that's probably true for most security practitioners. And of course, diplomacy. Politics are a thing. They may have contributed to your reasons for being there. They will definitely contribute to what happens coming out of there. You need to understand what that situation is. You don't want to make anybody look bad, your peers, various members of the board, anyone. So you have to understand what kind of situation you're getting into and handle that appropriately. So why are you there? Have a clear goal, or you're wasting everybody's time. And there's typically 3 categories of reasons you might be in front of the board. One is to get approval. You might have a specific, for something, you might have a specific proposal, and well, you should have a specific proposal. You're there to get approval for that proposal. You need to understand then. You need to understand, but you need to articulate why is whatever it is you're asking for, money, funding, mind share, staffing, whatever it is, why is it needed? And pick your moment. This may or may not be possible, but if somebody else is coming in with a big ask, and that's going to take all their attention, all their money, maybe you hold yours till the next time. That's it's something to keep in mind. It's not always possible or easy to do. And most importantly, does the board have the power to grant this to you? Are you asking for something at the right level? Should you be asking a peer? Should you be asking at a different level in the organization? Or is it truly the board who can give you what it is you're looking for? Another reason you might be there is to provide a status report. How are we doing? What's our risk? Where are we at in our security program? Again, the board cares about that from a business perspective. They don't care about your 4.9 billion attacks or whatever. They care about impact to the business. In most organizations is straight up dollars and cents. There are some reputational aspects and some health and safety and environment aspects, depending on your industry, of course. But they want insight into how security and what you're doing or lacking or asking for, or where your program is at in relation to the business, not at a project level, at a company level. Again, high grade a couple times more than you think. This is at a whole company level. It, a red, yellow, green stoplight is not a bad starting point, right? That level of simplicity, but backed by data, by scorecards, by metrics. I'll go into that towards the end here. What some ideas around scorecards. You want it to be consistent, and you want it to make be something you can build over or build on. And the last reason you might be there is strategy. To basically map out strategy or socialize a strategy or create a strategy. The first and most important thing there is to make sure you've got cross-organization alignment. There's no sense trying to pitch a strategy that you came up with in isolation to the board that's responsible for the whole company, right? Be aligned with your peers. With security, it's easy to fall into the doom and gloom or the fear, uncertainty, and doubt trap. Focus on the enablement. How is this going to achieve the company's goals, make the company better, put you in a better position? And don't be afraid to lead. You are there as an expert. This is your subject matter. Don't be afraid to lead, but you also have to listen to feedback and let your audience guide you in where you're going. But still, you're the expert. They're looking to you to lead. As it says at the top, have a clear goal. Otherwise, you're just wasting everyone's time. If you don't know what you want to come out of there with, then you shouldn't be going in. Now, what are some of the challenges we have to face before I get to some of the things we can do about them? The first challenge is the board composition. These statistics are a year or two old, but they're pretty accurate today. Average age of board of directors is 63.5 years old. 83% of those members have no technical expertise. If you look at this graph on the right, 86% of board members have traditional experience. Those are presidents, CEOs, CFOs, COOs, business people. Anyone else on the board, that's 14% of the total board members. And then security is just this little tiny square in that 14%. This is not to scale, obviously, but people with any sort of technical or security knowledge is a tiny proportion of the people on boards. And that's not getting better. Only 5% of new board positions in the last few years were actually filled by technologists. There's lots of arguments for why that should be, obviously the pervasiveness of the technology, but we're not there yet. It's not happening. Only 20% or less than 20% of boards have a technology-focused member. And when you kind of mash that all together, you run into the technology or security is cool. We're talking about nation states and hackers and attacks and incidents and things that people don't experience every day, hopefully, but that they think, that piques their interest. And what happens because of that, as a result of that, is you get how-to questions, which is not the level you should be talking to at the board. You should be talking about impact to the company, impact to the bottom line, to the organization, to reputation, health and safety, and what you're going to do about that. You don't want to end up in these how-to questions. So what do they care about? Well, they definitely do. This was a 2021 survey, I think, from PwC. In North America, 69% of board members ranked cyber threats as something they are extremely concerned about. And that's more in North America anyways than any other topic that they were extremely concerned about. In the rest of the world, pandemics and health crises were a little bit higher, and in fact, in first in some locations, but cyber threats were second there. So either way, they are front of mind. They care. You're there to help them know what to do about it because they don't know, they don't understand in all likelihood. They don't know the impact. They don't understand what they can do about it, what the risk is, what they should care about, what pieces of that they should care about, and what they shouldn't care about. So what happened? How did we end up here? Because this isn't this is not favorable for us going in front of the board. First off, IT and security professionals, this is definitely in front of the board or presenting or what have you. The security portfolio is very technical It's diverse and constantly changing. So it's hard even for practitioners to stay on top of it. How's the board going to stay on top? Some organizations, the CISO may not even be called that. It may not be a well-defined position. It may be someone who is accountable for getting things done, but lacking the responsibility or the ability to get those things done. That puts you in a really tough spot. Ideally, CISO should be a peer to the other C-level executives. That isn't always the case. We have a ton of data. I mean, look at your SIM, right? We have a ton of information, but it isn't necessarily actionable. Things that are happening to other organizations, nation state actors in other parts of the world or your part of the world. The threats are there, but is that information actionable? Is it something you can or want to do something about? Are there other mitigations? And of course, there's no absolutes. You can't put a number on the risk. None of those things, it's just not possible. Just talking for a second about the composition of the board. I meant to mention this on the previous slide. I'll go back there actually, if I can get the clicker to work. Oops, up here is I presented to a board of directors. It's kind of funny. I was there for dual purpose, to educate the board about cybersecurity in general, but also to update them. And I was kind of presenting on behalf of their IT organization, their security organization. This was at a bank. I guess you'd call it a small-ish bank, but a very broad. They have broad assets. But the reason I mentioned that they're small is because they were 40, 50 years old, and their founders were still on the board. One gentleman was 92. That he was literally being given his first iPad. Like that was one of the tasks for this board meeting, was to give him an iPad and teach him to use it. First off, that was very distracting for him. But secondly, there were points where he was struggling to stay awake. The rest of the time he's trying to figure out his iPad. And I knew at that moment that if I could leave him with one piece of information, one takeaway, one piece of context about security, I was winning the day. Like that was the goal. The composition is not working in our favor. So I think that day I decided I wanted to sell him on making sure that multi-factor was enabled for his personal accounts, literally. I think that's what it was. But you have to really contend with your audience in some cases. We have the other constraints I've talked about: limited time to present, technical content with a non-technical. Present to your spouse, your families, and so on. We have data. We have lots of data, but is it quantifiable? Is it the right data? Do we have, how can we present it? Tons of unknowns, no hard and fast answers. And this isn't unique to cybersecurity, but we deal with it a lot, which is risk from rare but impactful incidents. I mean, ransomware is probably not rare anymore, but I spend a lot of time in critical infrastructure, and honestly, there's lots of gaps. Security's not great. There's so many things, but you talk to the guys in the field, they've been at it for 40 years, nothing bad has ever happened. But if something bad happens, that is a really, really bad day. And sometimes it's hard to wrap anyone's head around those kinds of risks. And that's often what we're dealing with when we're dealing with organizational risk. I talked about politics, they're there. And the other thing that still, I think, sidelines IT and business and security, unless you can really speak to it well, is that the pure business drivers take precedence, right? Is it going to, I work for an oil and gas company. Is it going to get oil out of the ground? That's the conversation, right? It's a pure business, increasing profitability conversation that will always take priority. And that's just something you have to tie back as to why whatever it is you're there to talk about is important. So this is what we often hear. How secure are we from the board? Well, is the answer ever going to be we are 100% guaranteed secure? I sure hope not. So then, is this the right question? What do you do if I tell you it's 90% secure? Is that good, bad, indifferent? Maybe that's a useful score. But no, we can't be 100% secure. And if we can't, if this is the conversation, then the board's like, well, I'm now open to risk, to liability, personally and professionally. What are you doing here if you can't guarantee that we're secure, not making us secure? And then, of course, they start to meddle to protect themselves. So instead of how secure are we, a better question is, have we done enough? And it's your job to steer in this direction. Are we good enough? Some risks are mitigated other ways. Some risks maybe aren't important, or you just pay the cost, right? It's like having collision insurance on a 15-year-old car. You're going to write it off anyways. Hopefully you're not writing your business off, but you make a decision at that point to not pay for insurance because it's cheaper to pay to fix the problem, right? So we need evidence, however you can get that evidence. Measures and metrics are wonderful. I'll talk about those in a bit. Comparison to peers. I hate doing it because it's always point in time and your peers are changing just as fast as you are, but it gives you some sort of reference point, some sort of baseline, and can be valuable. Be consistent time over time. You're going to be back again for another stat. Test them, have actual data supporting them, audit it, as we all know, audit is security, but it can help with this process. And most importantly, show the progress over your stories. If you can say this at this level at some point and now move the bar. We moved here, we're a 1, whatever it means. Now we're a 1.2, now we're a 1.4. That is important. That you do. And then the goal here is to provide the insurance that we've done, or we have a plan and we're getting there, right? It's sorry about that. I just completely disconnected. So let me share again. Where are we? Oh, I completely disconnected there. So hopefully you see that I'm back. I guess I can't ask you to tell me if I'm not back, but hopefully you guys see me back. All right, good. Sorry about that. I have no idea what happened. All right, so we want to have a plan or show our progress, that we have, give the confidence that we have done enough. So last section here, how can we succeed? Some of these are kind of similar points, but they all have their own little spin. We want to understand our business. What makes us money, right? If I can't speak to what makes us money, then you know, I'm not on the same level as the board. I'm not having a real conversation with them. Related to that, because obviously customers drive your business, but do customers have other concerns? This drives to reputation in a lot of cases. Regulators have a say in many, many businesses. And that leads us to the currency of your business. You know, look at your mission statement, your values, your purpose. Most large organizations have those things well documented. What is it that drives your business? What's your mission? You should be talking about that in that context. This is kind of a funny one, but what emotional state do you want the board in? And what I mean by that is, do you want them worried? You may, to a point, although that can be dangerous. Do you want them raring to be aware? Do you want them to be concerned? Do you want them to be happy? You need to pitch your presentation to whatever that is that you want to accomplish. I've talked about this a lot. What is your one point, one thing, one takeaway? Go in there with one point that you are trying to hammer home and a single outcome, the most important outcome, one ask. Know going in what you want to come out with, right? Support yourself with data. I just talked about that, the evidence. And don't forget your peers, especially, you know, if you're a CSO or in the IT security organization. What does your IT leadership think? What are they doing? Are you aligned with them? Can you team up with them and combine some initiatives, right? Get some mind share that way. Those are all things to consider. I've kind of touched on this. If you can't summarize it on one slide, you've gone too deep. That it's back to that one thing again. So know your organization. These are some other thoughts. Read the annual report. Listen to old board meetings if you can. What's going on? What's front and center? What are people concerned with time after time? What does the language look like? Like, how do these meetings take place? What's going on during the meetings? How do you interact normally? Maybe you know what business risks are front and center. They've been discussed before. They are being discussed. And obviously take that context and think about how you might integrate security into that. Be consistent and repeatable as well. This is where templates, metrics, KPIs, whatever they are, get some help figuring out KPIs. But come back with the same templates, the same metrics, time after time, so you can build off that story, so you can show your progress, right? And then finally, get some help. Depends on your vendor, depends on your relationship with your vendor, but maybe, you know, we've brought in the CSO from our large vendor partners in some cases, because they live in these circles, they understand what's going on, or they can at least contribute content, ideas, review, whatever to your presentation. Find a champion on the board. Maybe there is that one technical member. Maybe there's the one person who understands security, or is younger, or is just enthusiastic about what you're doing. Make them your advocate. Talk to them in advance. Get them to help you figure out how to approach, what to do, right? Definitely give a preview. I mentioned I had to submit my slides in advance. There should be no surprises. You should be coming to tell the board things they already know and expand on it. Not surprise them. Do not do that. Now, before I talk about the metrics and the scorecard and so on, I just want to talk for a second about the basics. When we do security assessments, sometimes I have to ask this question 2 or 3 or 4 times, right? What is a critical asset? What are the important things? You know, because you want security that's relevant to those assets. This is kind of a hand-me-down story I've heard over the years, but so I don't know its true origins, but there was an organization, a multi-billion-dollar organization, and they were breached. And sorry, they had a process, some sort of industrial process, that made them 20% better than all of their competition. And this was a multi-billion-dollar company. And one day they got breached, that process got stolen. Not only that, it got stolen by somebody, shall we say, at arm's length from a foreign government, who then applied for a patent on this process, which made it public knowledge. So a foreign entity stole their process, erased that 20% market lead, and cost them, I've heard numbers between $1 and $3 billion. You figure it out, I don't know, lots of money is the point. And what that did, amongst many other things, was it made them understand what mattered. At that scale, a $5 million breach somewhere else in the organization maybe isn't such a big deal. And that seems strange to say, but this is back to kind of the insurance conversation again. You need to understand what matters, because there's no way you're going to protect it all. And this is true at a whole, you know, this starts at the top of the business. So figure out what those critical things are, and, you know, color that with what the board expects or what the board thinks those are as well. But it's really that thing, you know, and it may be the information you get from the guy in the hard hat on the ground, right? That's the thing that makes me run out of here screaming. I don't care about all these other things. That's what would make me run screaming. And see if you can find that. And it's not really for this presentation, but there's a number of processes like consequence-driven engineering, and there's another one whose name I can't remember now, but it's a crown jewel analysis. It's all about finding out what matters, so that then you can properly articulate the business risk, because whatever makes this guy in the hard hat go running is probably something that the board can relate to. And by making it relatable, they understand the risk and what you're trying to do about it. And really, they care about a few things. What is the consequence of the bad thing happening, whatever the bad thing is? So how bad is it going to be? How much is it going to cost me? How many people, lives, or environment? You know, it's really hard to have this conversation, but you may want to talk to the threat actors out there. Honestly, that's often way too far in the weeds for this conversation. Just there's bad people out there, they could do it. And then what levers does the board have? Because really, they have some power. They want to know how they can use their power to affect this specific scenario, and what is the cost to the organization of either pulling on the lever or choosing not to pull on the lever, right? That's the kind of conversation. This is, if you distill it right down to the basics, this is it. What's my risk? What's the bad or the consequence or the bad thing that could happen? What can I do about it? And how much does action or inaction cost me? That's really what it all boils down to. So scorecard. Yes, this is really colorful and noisy, and that may not be the right choice. Please take this as an example, something that you could use. What I tried to do here is put the important information on one slide, right? One glance, one look. Everybody loves NIST cybersecurity framework, so that's what I picked. Even this may be a little too much detail, but at least you can see there are these categories. We're red, yellow, and green in these categories. And here's where we are. You know, we've got little pieces of information in here, like our target, our trend over time. What is our actual quote unquote score? Is it going up or down? Where do we want to be? The peer comparison, like I said, I don't like that idea, but it can be a powerful narrative or a powerful lever to pull. And it's something that's almost expected, or that people like to see. You know, what are some of the things that have happened? What's new? What news is there? In this case, you know, the board's going to care about incidents. So what incidents have we had? Don't, you know, go into detail. Don't embarrass people. Don't complain. It's just these are the two things we did, and they'll probably ask you what you're doing about it, and you need to be prepared to tie that to initiatives or controls or whatever outcomes, and they'll want to know obviously what the outcome was. Probably they can ask about that. There are your current initiatives, and how are they going? Again, we don't want to get into project level status reporting here, but at least here are the major initiatives. Ideally, you tie those back to how they will help with the incidents. This is what's going on. And you know, those smiley faces or emoji. Again, schedule, cost, deliverables. Are you on target or not? What are some things going on in the world? You know, I'm sure we've all been asked about the colonial of itself is interesting, because I don't think the OT environment was directly impacted, but the business environment sure was. And if you're running a business, you're not putting oil in a pipeline if you don't know who it belongs to or who's paying for it at either end. So that was just, I found that really interesting about that particular incident. Is it, you know, as much as we talk about ICS security, it wasn't primarily an ICS incident, but it absolutely had operational impacts. You know, other things that are front of mind, the board may want more information on: work from home or return to office. Now, what are you bringing back into the office and plugging into those networks? SolarWinds supply chain obviously is a very, very salient topic that there are no perfect solutions for, that everyone is getting asked about. Cloud, visibility and management of the cloud. You know, you can tie that to your asset vulnerability and your SOC maturity and so on. And again, you don't have to have a formal presentation ready, but you know what? If you have a couple of hidden slides that talk to these things, if you get asked questions, certainly know what your answers would be to those questions if you do get asked. And then high level, what are you trying to accomplish this year, 3 years, 5 years? Pick your numbers, because I always say that every decision you make or every task you undertake should get you closer to those objectives. So I'm not going to read them in detail, but you know, what's near term, what's long term, what are you trying to accomplish? That's a lot, but you can get it on a page. It's something they can print out, take with them, bring back next time and compare all of those things, right? So, and if you Google, you know, security scorecards, or there's another word that I've forgotten, a specific kind of scorecard. There's lots of options out there. I'm really just trying to give you an idea of some of the things that I would expect the board to find valuable on the card. Obviously, if you're not a NIST organization, then don't use NIST. If you are, try and tie to that, right? And then maybe, again, you may or may not show this, but have the ability to drill down. So, okay, now we can get into details. We can get into historical context. You can see the progress over time. And you know what? You might even want to be able to drill down further on these. You may not. You may have a spreadsheet that you can bring up that explains where these numbers come from or whatever, because they have to come from somewhere. So you may as well bring that supporting documentation, have that available should you get asked the question. So you can get into more and more detail if asked, but I'm really a fan of having something that gives you that view at a glance. So finally, some key objectives. Why are we here again? I keep talking about that. We want to drive business conversations and enable the business. Can I say business and succeed? Usually that's money and not having bad things happen, some reputation. But you should be talking at a business level, not at a technical level. Having said that, you are the expert. I tell this to my team all the time. A customer brings you in because you know what you're doing. You're the expert. Be the expert, show it, live it. No waffle words. What I mean by that is, well, you should consider doing this. You may want to do that. Why don't you think about, like, forget that. You're the expert. Act it. And you know, make strong, reasoned, logical arguments or statements. I've talked about the evidence and the measurement and the metrics and trends and so on. Absolutely, that is how one way that you can relate and show progress, justify the money, you know, where the money went the last time that they spent with you. Hand in hand with business is risk management. It's the risk to the business, not the security of it. It's the risk to the business, to the company. Come with your purpose, your goal, your outcome. What's the one thing you want to do? Do everything you can to maintain that trust. Do not lose that trust, or nothing else can happen. And try to keep everybody focused, which can be hard with technology. Again, lead but listen, right? I should have put that on that slide. You want to lead because that's why you're there, but you want to listen to what's being said around you and answer that question. We have done enough. I've got a couple questions here. I've got one last slide and then I will talk about those. So to wrap it up, did you ask yourself, did you show progress using relevant, clear, business-centric metrics? Your presentation, or you should come out of there having shown that progress. Did you set expectations? What's next? What are you doing? What are your takeaways? What are their takeaways? What can they expect? You should be setting up the next session, the next meeting. You should already be giving them a preview almost. You want to change the target. If this isn't already the case, it's not about perfect security, it's about risk management, just like they're used to on the finance side. Reduce the fear, uncertainty, or did you reduce the fear, uncertainty, and doubt? That usually comes from lack of information, lack of metrics, lack of knowledge. So you should be able to reduce that uncertainty. You know, educate essentially without obviously going really deep. And finally, I can't say it enough, end with a clear, specific, realistic, it has to be accomplishable. You know, you want to have something to come back and talk to if this is quarterly in the next quarter, but a clear, specific, realistic ask with clear outcomes and clear timelines. So that's, you know, so organization specific, but hopefully that gives you that's triggered some things in your minds that you can take into consideration when you're presenting to the board. You know, none of this is meant to be a laundry list of do all of these things. It's, you know, your organization. If you don't, make sure you learn it and figure out which of these things can apply or do apply to you. So if you have any questions, I can answer them now. You should be able to find me in all the usual places based on the you know, the agenda for today or the schedule. I'm happy to take questions you know, out of band as well afterwards. But a couple of the points that are here in the Q&A, just looking, is really, yeah. And actually, this is something that I've noticed too, is it's really hard for new practitioners, especially people just coming out of school, to wrap their heads around this. Security and technology is complicated enough. There's just no way to cover it in school, and it doesn't get covered well. And then wrapping your head around what that means in a business context, you know, just doing, as security practitioners, we have so much to know, and we need to be constantly learning and constantly evolving. And now this is layering the business piece on top, and we have to be educating ourselves and learning as much as we can in that context also, and that's hard to do. For cost of security, one of the other questions here. I mean, there's the basics, right? What was my budget last year and what did I accomplish? Those kinds of things. For me personally, I really like to hammer home the people side of this, like not the social engineering stuff for security awareness, but the staffing, the people, because I will always, always, always maintain that. Let's say I have, what's a reasonable amount of money? 150 grand, $200,000. I will always, once you've got basics taken care of, obviously, I will always spend that money on a person over a tool. That's, you know, there's reasons to do other things, and you need tools and so on. You need to cover your basics, but one motivated, empowered, also important, from the top all the way down person is worth way more than any one tool you can buy. And I think finding a way to weave that into your conversation is hugely valuable to me, because the best practitioners I know are the ones who are the people who've been at it for a long time, and you want to keep those people in your organization. But costs of security, I think there are, you know, you can look at, there are lots of statistics from FireEye or Verizon or Deloitte or KPMG or PwC, all of those organizations. Who's it? IBM and Ponemon, I think, have a cost of the data breach report. So when things go bad, and you can point to real world scenarios. What's happening with the Colonial Pipeline right now, right? What did it cost whoever, I'm drawing a blank on breaches for some reason, but whoever it was in your community of interest who suffered a breach, what did it cost them? There are statistics like $10,000 an hour, or is that a minute, or I don't know. You know, it depends. It varies by organization. But number one is cost of bad thing, because obviously the measures we put in place, if they're cheaper than cost of bad thing, they're probably worthwhile. And the second part is, you know, what is your budget? What did you spend it on? And how did that help move the bar on your scorecard and make you better? And that's, you know, you can say, hey, last time I was here, I asked for $1 million to do project X. And now look, our score, validated by external auditors even, has moved from 2 to 2.5 or whatever it is. And so that's, you know, it's not, there's no perfect answer to that question, but that's how I would talk to security. Does anyone else? I think I'm running, yeah, I got 1 minute left. Any more questions? Like I said, I'll take questions. You can find me through the speaker bio and hit me up on LinkedIn or email or whatever, and I'd be happy to answer other questions. But if you have any now, I will talk to those. Otherwise, I think I'm going to get cut off in about a minute. Let me look in the chat too. Sorry, I had the Q&A window open. Where's the chat window? Sorry, I was looking in the Q&A window. I believe we have a booth, and this deck is available in that booth. If not, again, hit me up on LinkedIn or email or something, and I can share this. I'll see if I can get it posted on our website as well. But I believe Mark is in our booth, and he can share the deck with you as well.